Cool. Well, I'm delighted to be joined today by Ed Leigh, host of Ski Sunday. Hi, Ed. How are you?
Very well indeed, thanks, Ian.
Whereabouts are you just now?
I'm in Salzburg. I've come up to do a little bit of work with RedBull, but in between, we just finished up what was supposed to be the men's downhill in Garmisch and turned into a women's free ski event from Aspen. But the World Championships are starting tomorrow, I think. So we'll be covering that for the next 10 days.
Excellent. Well, actually, the last time I looked it up, the last time we had you on the podcast, episode 169, was almost exactly 2 years ago. You were literally at the World Championships at Maribel Courchevel at the time, and that's when we chatted. And we bumped into each other last year in Chamonix at the Kandahar races, which was also in February. So you should probably pencil in your diary now, maybe February next year, or at a minimum, Crans-Montana for the next World Champs in a couple of years' time. A question I always like to ask my guests is, when did you last ski or snowboard? I'm guessing in your case it was snowboarding. When were you snowboarding last?
I was snowboarding on Saturday up at which is now 2 days ago, 3 days ago, up at the Zugspitze glacier that sits on top of Garmisch, Partenkirchen. Absolutely beautiful, really lovely little area.
Right. How was the snow there?
There was it was really surprising actually. We'd had a dusting down in town. It's like Garmisch is in winter, very cold, dark place, and it gets this fog that hangs around. But as soon as you get on the cable car, it's very like Wengen. There's a train and a cable car option to go up to about 2,993, if memory serves. And there was more snow than we thought, but I first looked at it and it's like, oh, it's misery blanket. It's 5 centimeters on frozen crust. And I spent the first 2 runs. They've got some gorgeous, really beautiful blasting pistes there. Did 2 blasts on the piste and then cut between 2 pistes. And the snow was really, really good. The base underneath wasn't frozen. There wasn't much on top of it, but it was really, really good snow. So had a few, I would dare to say, powder laps.
Great. Well, I'm excited. I'm actually going out to not the Alps, but the Dolomites tomorrow. So I'll be on snow again shortly. But you mentioned that you're in Austria at the moment for the World Championships, which are coming up in Saalbach, and that's with Ski Sunday. How has the season been so far with Ski Sunday? I wonder if you could give listeners a sense of what it's like when you're on the road, recording, going from resort to resort.
It's such a unique show. It's from the outside, it looks so glamorous, but it is. I can't lie. They're every day you're up at altitude. You're in beautiful resorts, but there is. I say this to a lot of people. The reality is that I am a part-time TV presenter and full-time driver and baggage handler. You're moving so much kit around the Alps so often. So I would start the first bit you drive, fly into Munich, and then we drive, because that's a great hub for a hire car. So you fly into Munich, we drove 4.5 hours down to Klagenfurt, then it's 2.5, you're there for 3 or 4 days, then cross to Madonna di Campiglio for 3 or 4 days. Then a lot of the crew leave. I would go 5-6 hours across to Larks, sit there for 5 or 6 days, get the start of the Open up and running. I'll then do, I think it's 5.5-6 hours back to Cortina. I do a day, we shoot the bulk of a show in a day there, then I'm back to Larks. And then Larks, you move on to Kitzbühel. I snuck in Shop's first try, which is an snowboard industry testing couple of days in Hochfugen. So you're bouncing around and it is amazing, but you live out of a bag. I live out of a bag for 7 weeks and I never take it for granted. I know how privileged I am, but when you get to this end, if you get more than 3 or 4 days, as we're going to get in Saalbach now in one place, it's glorious. It's really lovely.
That is great. And I guess maybe something that was clear there, you're giving the impression that it's a pretty small team working on Ski Sunday altogether. You obviously got yourself and Chemmy as the presenters, but how many other people are on that team then?
You then have a producer whose job it is to organize everything. They're in contact. So depending on where you are, what you're doing, if you're in Klagenfurt, the producer's job is talking to the British team about how we can access Chris McCormick and Mia Brookes. He's organising all the simple stuff, but whether it's parking passes and your accreditations, getting the scripts done, organising where we're shooting stuff. But there's a lot of stuff. It's not like a classic TV show where Chemmy and I can help with so much stuff. We've got it. So it's 4 of us: cameraman, producer, myself and Chemmy on site. And then we have a guy called Dave Horwell, who would be best described as something akin to the Oracle out of the Matrix. He has archive of pretty much every episode of Ski Sunday, all of the features we've ever done on site. And anything we shoot, the 4 of us will shoot up on the mountain. Dave is back at base and is ingesting all of that footage and then chopping it up and starting to put chunks of the show into a finished format so they can just be dropped in. So it is a small team, but I'm not sure how it could get any smaller, really. But I said it earlier in the season, this is my 19th year, and it's really, I know my way around the Alps. I can iron out and work, and Chemmy knows the Alps like the back of a hand. Between us, we know a lot of the resorts. We know where to shoot, how to shoot. So you're not, it can take up a huge amount of time. This sounds ridiculous, but just finding a good location to shoot. So you go to a fresh resort somewhere, this season, Madonna di Campiglio, and you think, okay, we're going to need some slopes to work with. We ended up on an area of the mountain that would be the best area for beginners, because as the editor said at one point, I've done more runs than I have turns. It was too flat to actually film anything, but you're up there hunting for just a little bit of space to be able to film some stuff. You need light in the right direction. You can't have too much wind. You can't have lift noise. If you've got a noisy chair or cable car, if you've got too many people coming past. So if you know a resort and you've got your favorite spots, you're going to the Dolomites. If you go to Cortina, you go up the Olympia del Tofana, and there's about 3 spots you can pile off, and you can shoot almost a whole show in a 270-degree rotation. So the cameraman doesn't move. You get different views, different light angles. It's so beautiful and so easy there. And we don't do that, but you could if you wanted to.
Brilliant. Well, it shows how useful experience is in that respect. And 19 seasons, I would say you probably would know your way around the Alps by then. You mentioned the features that you film as well. Some of our listeners will probably have watched Ski Sunday this year. I certainly enjoyed watching you teaching Chemmy how to snowboard. Was she genuinely a natural snowboarder?
Yeah, it's so interesting. The first professional athlete that I taught to snowboard was Colin Jackson, the world record holder for Olympic 110-meter hurdles. And it was ridiculous. You take someone who A, has really high physical intelligence, and B, is used to being coached. When you teach a lot of people, you give them 3 things to do and hope that they do one of them. With the athletes, you can give them 3, 4, 5 things, and they're implementing all of them because they can compartmentalize what's happening in their body and they get it. Chemmy was that good. I mean, you can watch the reverse and see that I definitely am not a professional athlete when I ski.
I was going to come on. I was going to come on to that, but it's interesting what you say about athletes there, because I've interviewed. I'm thinking it might be Stu Brass, but it might be Warren Smith when we were talking about the jump, and he told me that Lewis Smith was the best person he'd ever coached, because again, working with professional athletes, he just soaked it all in, actually listened to what he was being told, and then delivered at the same time.
Well, every time I've done it, you don't have to sugarcoat anything. They're so used to being barked at. You're doing that wrong. Do it like this. They don't take it personally and collapse, have a crisis of confidence and need to be rebuilt. You just say, don't do that, do that. And they're like, okay, and just get on with it. It's a really efficient process. And I think it comes from years of being broken down and built back up.
And what about your experience on skis then? How did you find there was a section where you were learning, it wasn't just skiing, it was actually, learning to race on skis and kind of, hit the slalom gates?
it was actually a little bit demoralizing because Chemmy's really good. She'll give me the best chance to do well. We got up there and she said, I want you on it early before there's a rut line. You'll be able to ski it properly then. But there was the sun's always low in January, but there was no sun strike on it. It was a north facing hill. So we had to wait for about an hour and a quarter, hour and 20 minutes. And we did some links and bits and pieces while we were waiting. By the time we came back to it, 200 people had been through it and it got a giant rut line in it. And I was gutted because I'd got a really nice set of GS skis, and on the piste, I was actually getting I was building some angles and I was getting some nice turns. But twofold, the moment you get on a course, you're making the turns where you have to make them, not where you want to make them. And I was battling a rut line. And I'd got a little bit overconfident a run before we did it. And I'd gone hooning down a black, lost a ski that had bounced up. And there's not much left of it now, but I had a giant swell bow. Somehow the heel cup bounced up and lacerated my elbow. I was like, oh. I skied that course angry, and I think I tried to be sort of gentle and nice at the bottom, but I think you can see it if you watch it carefully.
Yeah, well, I know that you presented on Ski Sunday before carrying injury, but I discussed this with yourself, but with Chemmy as well, who said that, you're just unbelievable. I think it was it when you were in Lux during the COVID season and you'd done your ACL, and they were kind of trying to get these scenes shot as quickly as possible and propping you up so nothing would have come across on camera.
Yeah, it was that was a really hard year. It was a really good snow year, and I think we were about 7-8 days into a 7-show series, and it was so important that we got the show away. And I was actually, the first 4 weeks of it with the injury, I was fine. But then I opted to have the surgery there, where I'd had all the MRIs and met the surgeon. So the last 2 episodes, I'd got a knee that the moment I was vertical felt like someone was hitting it with a sledgehammer. It was like, but we got through it. It was, yeah. I think people might have guessed it was a bit weird that I wasn't doing anything. I think I've told you this before. If you watch the credits, we shot the new Ski Sunday credits in that season. So there's a body double for me, and he over eggs his hand for me. Like, I've got a floppy hand when I snowboard, and he mocked me with that. But there's shots of any shot of me putting my goggles down. It's a sort of, it wasn't green screen. It's me bouncing up and down, just in front of a gimbal with a blue sky behind me. So.
Oh, that's excellent. And yeah, we mentioned the features from this season. We're going to come on to some of the racing action, you might say, because you featured Big Air this year, which was fantastic. And we're going to come back to that. But I wondered if I could just touch on the Olympics, because you mentioned you've been on Ski Sunday for 19 years now. And I think it was actually the Olympics that led to the Ski Sunday gig, if you want to call it that, because when snowboarding, if I have the chronology right, when snowboarding first came into the Olympics, it was Turin, and you were commentating on that, and that led to the work with Ski Sunday. Is that right?
Almost, for me personally, yes. But the only difference, snowboarding came in 1998, so Turin was the third cycle, and no one knew what to expect in Nagano in 98. They had a guy called Ian Felton did some of the commentary in Salt Lake City in 2002, but and I was actually I was gutted I wasn't doing it at the time, but looking back now, I was really pleased that I didn't do that. I learned an awful lot more about mainstream broadcasting. I was very raw and very core, I would say, in 2002. If I'd have done the job then, I might not have been as experienced and equipped as I was in 2006 when Turin came around. And I was able to, I spent I started emceeing live events in 95, 96, but then I really went to university between about 97 and 2004, emceeing live events when you get to practice all of these lines. A lot of the time you're speaking to audiences who don't understand the sport, so you're getting instant responses as to what lines are working, what people respond to, how it works, how you translate a very niche esoteric sport to a mainstream audience. And by the time I got to Turin and got the job in 2006, I knew how to do that, and I credit that with being able to do a half decent job. And it was really tough, actually, because there were a lot of people queuing up. Hazel Irvine moved on to the snooker, I think, at that point. So there, like, a lot of people knew that there was a slot opening up on Ski Sunday, and a lot of skiers thought it was theirs. So it put some noses out of joint, understandably, when they were like, "Oh no, we'll put a snowboarder in." Everyone was like, but,
well, I mean, I remember that time in particular because you were hosting with Graham to start off with, and there was this brilliant kind of, I don't know if you want to call it a spin-off series where was it called High Altitude, where the two of you just took on some insane challenges during that period. I mean, those would have been the glory days when a lot of money was invested in creating great television.
It was wonderful. And probably the biggest broadcast opportunity I've ever had with High Altitude. I mean, they were looking for a winter alternative to Top Gear in a way, we had some incredible experiences. I got, the year before that, 2007, they didn't really know what to do with me. So at the end of that season, I went to the series producer at the time, Gabby Cook, and said, there's some ideas that I could do. And I went back to New Zealand and we shot a piece on Snow Park, the first purpose-built snow park, one lift, it was just a snow park, and then a piece on whether you could go skateboarding, surfing and snowboarding in a day somewhere. And they saw those and they said, "Have you got any more ideas like this?" It's like, yes. I'd like to go to the Himalayas. I'd like to go to Morocco. I'd like to go to Siberia. I'd like to go, and reeled off. And they said, "Yeah, okay, go and do those." It's like, okay. And that, we started filming some of those, and that became the basis for High Altitude. And it was wonderful. But looking back with the benefit of hindsight now, I wish that opportunity had come. It came in 2009. We shot that through 2009 and 2010. I wish I'd had the chance to do that in 2018, 2019, 10 years later.
Right. Why is that?
I didn't understand enough about formats, what we were doing, and it feels, at the time, that's how TV was made, but it feels very one-dimensional and indulgent now. When I look back at what we did, I'd like to have made it deeper, there are a few things you could have done that would have made it translate a bit better to a mainstream audience. But it came when it came, and I learned so much from that show. It was really interesting. It was a fascinating time. I listened to someone today talking about the concept of adrenaline burnout, though, and I remember finishing off shooting that series where we'd tried to squeeze in Ski Sunday, and in between we were doing all of these challenges. So we were flat out 7 days a week, and you'd find yourself trying to tour from the back of Teen to Val Thorens on split boards, or get hurled down the skeleton track at Eagles, or you're doing all of these different things, and you're absolutely exhausted. I burned out 2 cameramen on that series who had close to nervous breakdowns, and that because they were doing the same thing as me, but with 25 kilos of camera equipment on their back usually.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I guess people don't necessarily think about when you have those shots where you and Chemmy, for example, are talking to the camera and you're skiing down the slope. There's someone skiing down there with you who's filming you at the same time. You mentioned your first Olympics, where
yeah, they're usually locked in a death plow, pointing a gimbal at you. You're like, you just point the camera, I'll find you. You concentrate on where you're going. So it's often that process is a very long. We wait, and January's perfect for filming that on-piste stuff because the pistes are the emptiest they'll be all year or winter, and we have to wait for totally empty piste because whether it's me or Chemmy, one of you will be in front of camera, one of you is hovering just out of shot, waiting to go, and all three of you are careening down the piste. So, yeah, you have to make sure it's clear.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier, or I think we mentioned earlier, that Turin kind of led to the Ski Sunday job. And since then, you've been working not just Winter Olympics, but Summer Olympics as well. And I really enjoyed listening and watching the BMX and skateboarding in Paris, I guess last summer. We're in 2025 now, aren't we? How is that out there? Do you enjoy commentating on skateboarding? Because, to me, it was just the most interesting Olympic sport I've ever seen, probably.
I'm a skateboarder first, maybe not foremost, but definitely first. I'm deeply passionate about it. I started when I was about 8 years old. I watched someone do an ollie where you crack the skateboard with your back foot and then guide it with your front foot into the air. And I couldn't believe what I'd seen. It was like magic. And I still get that feeling today watching Paris. Like, what I can do as a lifelong skateboarder is so pedestrian. It is magic what they can do with those boards today. Like, it's you've got elements of ballet, that grace there, but then you've got the technical skill of something like table tennis, where your foot has got to be in exactly the right place. Oh, apologies. Oh, and that's my wife. Can I call you later? You get this. It's such an incredible combination of skills, because you've got to have the grace of a ballerina, you've got to have the technical skill of a table tennis player, you've got to strike that board perfectly for it to spin and then meet your feet. You've got to have, in the park and on the street, aerial awareness, and all of the time you've got to have it with this ridiculous level of exposure to risk, like the damage you can do to yourself at any time. Slams are so real, it can be so painful. So, and I marvel at that. I find it astonishing. And I think skateboarding needs a lot of help to translate, because not everybody stands on a skateboard. A lot of people do, but most people ride a bike at some point in their lives. So when you watch someone on a BMX doing what they're doing, it instantly translates. You think, okay, they could jump over a house, they're upside down and they've taken their feet off the pedals, they're spinning the frame around, they've got to catch that and then land. And layer all of that, the joy of getting to sit down and talk about these sports you love with two very good friends, on top of the fact that Paris is I think that was my 8th or 9th Olympics. That was the best one by a long way.
Yeah, well,
to use those landmarks.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed watching it, and I know that loads of people enjoyed the commentary as well. And I was doing a little bit of a research looking around, and I saw someone said every time I heard yours or Tim Warwood's voice coming out of the TV, I knew there'd be something fun to watch, and that's kind of how it felt. I love the fact, although there are a couple of outliers, like in the British team, so many of the competitors are like really young teens, and so watching that with my kids, who have now got to the age where you've got top class athletes who are younger than them, was just outstanding. Just seeing this talent, such young talent.
It's amazing, isn't it? In the women's park and street in Tokyo, the average age I worked out of the street medalists was 14 and a half. I think that stayed. And Arissa True, was she 14? So young. Really, really, like, it's, yeah, the women's skate especially, the level of progression, the speed of progression is just outrageous. But I think LA will be very, very different. But it's, I've only done 2 summer games, London and on-site, London and Paris. We did Tokyo from Manchester. But generally, the locals tend to leave because they think it's going to be overrun. You only get a small percent. You get the international community come in to support the games. So you've got a relatively empty city that has a real party atmosphere to it. And for the right city, it's just outrageous, and Paris did it perfectly. I think we've talked about it a lot, myself, Mark, Tim, and a few other people who were there. I think it's definitely the best job I've ever done in terms of like the sport that we got to see and the way the games worked. And I think now it will probably be the best games I ever do, because the model for the BBC will change moving forward. There'll be very, very few people on site. So, yeah, that might be the last summers, definitely, but maybe the last Olympics we do on site. So.
It was a brilliant one. I'm interested. We could probably fill a whole podcast with this question, but I'm interested to know what you think. I think when snowboarding first came into the Olympics in 1998, as I correctly state now, there was a lot of kind of commentary within the sport, within the industry, that maybe the sport was selling out by being, allying itself with FIS, etc. And is there a bit of that conversation going on in relation to skateboarding? Something that should be about expression coming into the Olympics as well?
Interestingly, no. So what history has taught us is that it's the federation that takes you in that denotes your experience of the games and how you're treated. So BMX, very like snowboarding, has quite an uneasy relationship with the UCI because it doesn't have room, just as the FIS don't really take into account snowboarding's culture. And there are now, it's taken a long time, but there are now snowboarders running snowboarding at the FIS. There is a sense of culture and respect there, which there wasn't when it started. There were very few people who understood and would give any respect's not the right word, but any credibility to core snowboarders. It was an uneasy relationship. Whereas skateboarding is governed by World Skate, which covers a lot of the roller sports. And the head of World Skate sort of went, "We know nothing about skateboarding." They held their hands up straight away, and they let skateboarders come in and decide how it would be run. And watching skateboarding at the Olympics for the first time in person in Paris, it was very clear that skateboarding was running its competitions and that it had been given that chance. And what's lovely about it, skateboarding also had a very unique format in the SLS and the Vans Park series contests that were just taken up lock stock into the Olympics. So those formats, they're harder to understand. I think the street skateboarding is harder to understand for mainstream audiences, but it works and it projects skateboarding in the right way. So that's worked really well in their favor, I think.
Right, that's really good to hear. Okay, segueing back to snowboarding again, then I mentioned it earlier. It was fantastic to see the big air, and you said you went to Klagenfurt. It's one of the first episode, I think, of the season. And not only that, Mia Brookes is having an amazing season so far. I think she's had 3 wins already, podiums as well. I mean, you're in Lux where she took a win as well. Why is it we don't see more kind of freestyle snowboarding action or skiing action for that matter on Ski Sunday? I seem to have in my mind there's some kind of issue to do with rights going on.
Lots of different things. So the new president of the FIS was brought in on a mandate to sort out the broadcasting rights, because right now each nation controls the rights for its own events. So Ski Sunday has to buy a package from the European Broadcast Union, the EBU, and Infront and FIS that gives us an even share. So you're buying, I think we can only buy 3 Austrian events. You buy 3 Swiss events, and then so we mixed it up. I think we've got 2 Italian ones, a German one, 3 Swiss, but we could have done, it would have been lovely to go. I was so excited when I looked at the calendar. We could have had Klagenfurt for a big air, then back to back straight into Kreisberg for a big air. So you could have had Mia winning back to back, and then into Larks. But there's always, when a race gets cancelled, there's some flexibility, but we traditionally don't buy any events from the US. So the Aspen World Cup that's going on at the moment, it's straight off the back of X Games. You've got half pipe, slopestyle and big air for free ski and snowboard. We were given that at the last minute. Infront said, yes, you can have rights to Kirsty Muir's free ski slopestyle because we haven't got Garmisch. That race is gone. But it's very, very messy and tangled. So, and then the Larks Open is owned by someone else entirely. And we cobbled together using the limits of the highlights to be able to make what we make for Ski Sunday, because Viaplay won't allow us to show a full, they won't even respond to rights requests. So it's right. So confusing and complicated. And we do our best always to try and show the best races, the best sport. But it's, you can, that's a conversation that you could have a 4-hour podcast on rights.
Well, what is great about it was you did get to feature Mia Brookes, and not only able to feature during one of her wins and at Larks as well. And I think that people are increasingly aware of this unbelievable talent. She was 17 then, she's 18 now. I'm interested. She's competing in big air and slopestyle. Do you think she has a stronger discipline of the two?
Not really, no. Because she's proved she can put that 1440 that's winning her big airs, she can land that in slopestyle runs. So, and I love women's slopestyle and big air. Is men's pipe is really good, but women's slopestyle and big air, where it's at the moment, the talent that's in there, and the fact that all of the riders have different styles and are pulling the sport in different directions. It's like when you had Christopherson's touch, Hirscher's power, and like in Alpine, when you get lots of different styles of racer kind of coming to the same times, it's lovely. And that's what's happening in women's slope and big air snowboarding at the moment. You've got Zoe and Mia, who are incredible on the rails, but going in slightly different directions on the jumps. You've got Anagasa, who's very strong on the jumps, chasing down triples. You've got the Japanese riders who are super tech on the jumps, but struggle with consistency. There's loads of push me, pull you, and you really don't know what you're getting. There's realistically anywhere between 5 and 7 riders at each comp who could take the top spot. And I love that about it.
Well, that is great that the competition level is there. I think, I tend to view these things with a Team GB Snow Sport hat on and look at it and think, well, this is fantastic. She's in great form. We have an Olympics, as you mentioned, in a year's time. She's evidently very young, and, lots of things can happen in a year, but it's extremely exciting. Another potential medalist, because I've said that now, who's also a snowboarder, Charlotte Banks. I noticed she picked up a couple of wins over the weekend. Have you seen her in action?
I have a few times, and I mean, she is an absolute machine. And the joy of snowboard cross and ski cross is that there is athleticism there. You have to work hard. You have to be immensely powerful. You need that explosive start, which is it doesn't come easily as you age and you're losing that immediate power. You've got the strength, but in snowboard cross, the experience of racing in close proximity and the power of tactics, it takes a long time to learn that. And Charlotte has that by the bucket load. She is such an experienced racer. And I always say, it's looking ahead to the Olympics, it's really cruel with snowboard cross, especially because when you look at slopestyle or big air, get a couple of bites of that cherry, you're going to get 2 runs in the final. Snowboard cross, it's one race, and you'll see the excellence in the snowboard cross field across a World Cup season rise to the top, because you'll have a couple of bad luck areas. But when it comes down to the Olympics and it's 4 races, and one mistake in any of those races ends the Olympic dream. It's very, very difficult. And I feel sorry for those athletes, but Charlotte will be there or thereabouts. She's in such good form. If she's fit, then she's going to be in the mix for the medals, 100%.
And you mentioned, the experience. I looked it up earlier. She is 29 years old, and as you say, that makes a lot of difference when you're in a really tactical race like snowboard cross. And on the skiing side of things, I think Zoe Atkin, took a win in the half pipe recently in Aspen. Kirsty Muir is on her way back. There's some other younger talents as well. I'm interested to know what your opinion of. Maisie Hill is also on the snowboarding side of things. She's, had some, pretty good results. She's only 23. I don't know if that makes her young or old in the world of snowboarding freestyle.
Yeah, I always say there's a line I use for riders over the age of, for men, it's kind of 27. For women, it's interestingly 31, 32. Anna Gasser's 33 now, and she's worked so hard to get a triple. But I did say it about Anna, I think, in Klagenfurt, that she's positively Jurassic in snowboarding terms now, if you were to carbon date her. But so Maisie's got a bit of time there. There's a decade ahead of her, but the sport is progressing so quickly, and she's getting to a level now where she'll not start knocking on the door of finals. She's starting to look at top 8, top 10 finishes. But as you said, you've got Mia, 5 years younger than her, already at that. Mia's got 12, she's got 14s. And that's where the sport's going very, very quickly. Zoe Sadowski-Synnott and Mari Furcada could push, I think, Big Air in Livigno next year could be in the realm of a 1620, which is what, there's a few men who don't have a switch backside 1620 on a slopestyle course. And I think Zoe could potentially get there. So,
wow. Well, that'd be one to commentate on, or to listen to the commentary on. I got one other question about younger athletes. I don't know at all. Firstly, how to say their name, and secondly, if you're going to know them. But I think I'm going to say maybe Txema Mazet Brown. Do
very
you
good.
know?
Chemmy Alcott.
Because you're right. You're from New Zealand, or you live in New Zealand, and so is Txema. But has now transferred across to Team GB after a lot of success at the junior level, and I think he could be interesting to watch out for.
Yeah, he's amazing history. His mum Rachel is from the UK. His dad Francois is from Maribel in the Three Valleys. He was born in Madagascar and raised in New Zealand. New Zealand have so much talent coming through in that age bracket in slope and big air. There's a kid called Cam Melville-Ives who they've moved over into half pipe, and they've still got too many kids ahead of Milan Cortina. So Txema shifted across. As soon as he came across, he took the junior big air world championship title. He's very, very good. What's interesting, I've observed this a few times. You get the RedBull helmet or you get the Monster helmet, and the entire industry looks around at you and goes, "Oh, you're a big deal, are you?" And he got that straight away. Marcus Cleveland, the Norwegian slope legend, gave it to him. And I always see, especially for young riders, there's a period where they almost get imposter syndrome from being given the lid and everyone looking at them, and they're like, "Oh, I've got to live up to this." The quicker, my advice to him is forget about that. Get it out of the way as quickly as you can. He is super talented. The skill is there. All he needs to do is start getting his runs down at World Cup level, and he's showing glimpses of it. The moment he gets through that barrier and he finds the consistency, he's going to be very, very strong contender. If he can do that by Milan Cortina next year, then yeah, he's in the mix.
Oh, well, that could be really interesting. Okay, so this is really interesting. We covered Ski Sunday and the Olympics, UK talent. But I particularly wanted to ask you about something called the Natural Selection Tour, and I think that some of our listeners may not be familiar with it. And it seems to me that this is kind of lifting up the rankings as far as the athletes are concerned. There's a kind of kudos to be taking part in the Natural Selection Tour in the same way as you get with the X Games. I wondered if you could maybe explain a little bit about what it is and how it's evolved.
Well, if you look at every park and pipe or every free ski and snowboard competition that exists in our realm at the moment, even the Free Ride World Tour, they are trying to take these outdoor sports and get them TV friendly. And that means bringing them into some kind of stadium or arena setting. And X Games, that it's made for TV. That is a TV broadcast, and you're kind of selling advertising using skiing and snowboarding. The Freeride World Tour they need the venue, but also a lot of those venues, it's a tourist area, and they're selling their terrain. So you have these beautiful amphitheaters in Becerra Barret or Fieberbrunn or Verbier where people can go and watch. Natural selection is the antithesis of that. It is Mother Nature is the main character. The events aren't built for spectators. It is letting the athletes ride in the best terrain, in the best conditions. And the athlete roster is extremely limited. So if you look around at free ski or snowboard slopestyle, there's 60 men in the field, there's 30 women. And it is very time consuming to get through all of those people. And very often the judging suffers if there's any kind of weather or issue with the course or the timings for the day. The Freeride World Tour, the skiing is just gigantic. You have at least 2 days. If there's more than 12 athletes, 8 men and 4 women in natural selection, you have 2 days of competition. So it's all about giving the athletes premium conditions. And it's not about being part of a federation and having strict judging criteria. It's about allowing people room for creativity and risk. So that's the background. It's been a snowboard comp since 2021. It's now in its 5th year. But this year it expands into surfing, which has already happened in the Marshall Islands in Micronesia. A mountain bike event, which will go down in New Zealand in 12 days' time, 15th of February. And then the snowboarding happens middle of March. And then at the end of the year, the event will take place in March, but the broadcast will be in mid-April. Skiing joins the party.
Right. And so you're talking about events like Freeride World Tour and the FIS, etc., where they're trying to put on events where spectators can see them. But you're saying that this is the natural selection tour is taking place kind of in the backcountry or off of the main track. So it's all predominantly done for video, I take it then.
Exactly. And that was, I think, the defining part of what Travis Rice is behind it, the snowboarder. And Travis had a vision of, he'd worked so much because Travis has been responsible for some of the most seminal, not just snowboarding films, action sports films. When you think of The Art of Flight, That's It, That's All. And he understands that relationship between the act, the physical act of the sport. But then if you want anyone to react to it, you actually need to capture it because you can't see the best moments live. So he worked very hard with a guy called Gabriel Cocker, an ex-drone racing world champion, to develop a drone that would be able to follow people. And that now feels quite normal. When you watch a lot of sports, they have that gamification where the drone is right behind the athlete. But that was pioneered in 2021 by Travis and the team on natural selection. And Gabriel Cocker is still by far the best pilot at doing that. To an extent that natural selection treat the drone follow cam, the FPV drone, as their safety angle. That's the one they know they'll get. So there's a couple of athletes on the hill, but the broadcast has been, the quality of the broadcast has been key to natural selection's success. But that's what they're trying to bring, that same philosophy that I talked about, this incredible broadcast covering the best athletes in the best location with the best conditions. So the surf has gone down on this tiny atoll out in the middle of Micronesia. The mountain biking, I've been a part of building this ridiculous course down in on a hill overlooking Queenstown. The snowboarding happens the first day in the side country of Revelstoke, the second day in the back country. But the ski will probably be the most true to the ethos, in the sense that it's going to Todrillo Lodge up in Alaska, which was the same place that the snowboarding went in year 2 and 3. And there's only room for 12 skiers, 8 men, 4 women, and a skeleton crew to make it happen. So it's they'll get some incredible terrain, and the list of skiers is outrageous.
And so how do you get the invite for that then? You talk about very, very limited numbers. And what's the format of the competition once they're in place?
So the invite comes from a selection committee, usually made up of core media. And you'll have a mediator at the top, and then you'll have 4 or 5 people discussing. Athletes and brands and team managers submit all of the footage they have of potential athletes. I sit on the committee for the snowboard one, so I know that process. I'll watch footage from around 45 male athletes, probably 15 to 18 female athletes. You're watching 18 to 20 hours of footage of athletes, and then you're breaking it down. And generally, the criteria that we're looking at is a variety of terrain, but you can't just have big jumps in the backcountry into powder. You've got to have natural lines. You've got to have natural takeoffs. So we drill down, but you can see quite quickly who's at what level. And I start making a list, popping people in a rough order. We only have 8 spots free for the snowboarding each year. Sometimes it's only 6, depending on wildcards and injuries. So you're usually debating the top 10 or 12 people. And it's a painful process because it can make or break careers. So we take it super seriously. But yeah, once you make the competition in snowboarding, there are duels where you get invited to go head to head with someone else. And then if you make it through that, then you get into the main event. With the skiing, in its first year, it's fledgling. There are limited spots, limited time. So it's just been a straight shot of 8 athletes picked on previous merit of video parts and current work that they've done. And then there's straight in, and it'll be head to head, essentially quarterfinal, semi-finals, final.
Right. It sounds super interesting. It's already started, right? Because Tim Warwood was out in and about last week. Was that for some qualifying events?
Yeah, so the snowboard duels have already started. So there's 4 men's duels. Is that right? Yes, we'll qualify 4 riders through to the men's, and then there's 2 women's duels, qualify 2 women through to the main event. And then the snowboard. So skiing should get to this relatively quickly, but it will be, the interesting part is finding a venue. So when natural selection first started, it was in Travis Rice's home resort of Jackson Hole. And Travis invested a lot of his own money into a zone of side country in Jackson where they augmented the slope. But it was open to the public outside the event window. And you'd have this incredible terrain with the jump. There's wooden features that in summer are just lifted off the hill. But they make up landings and they make up takeoffs. And Revelstoke have done the same now. One of the snowboarders, Dustin Craven, has had a crew, I think, of 12 lumberjacks in there building these features and augmenting the slope. And if they can find a venue, it might be that the skiers end up at Revelstoke 2 weeks before or after the snowboarding, and they'll have this dual format, and then you'll have a qualifying day and then a finals day. But it may be that they find another resort entirely for that. I'm not sure. But...
Right. Okay. And Tim was saying that he couldn't reveal who had won those duels. Has that footage gone live yet, or do you find that out later on?
I think RedBull TV will start releasing those in mid-Feb, probably around February the 16th, 15th or 16th, maybe the 17th, because they work as a great PR exercise to get everyone hyped and realize that the main event's coming. I think the window opens for natural selection snowboard on the 10th, actually, so it'll be the end of February, it'll probably be 24th or 25th of Feb. So you'll have 2 weeks of duels coming out, and then the main event starts. But all of the other events, because the production value needs to be so high, that's one of the calling cards for natural selection. The surfing, the mountain biking, and the skiing will all be post-produced shows. There'll be live shows recorded in Santa Monica, but the action will have been pre-cut. So
Right. And if listeners wanted to watch it, then you mentioned like snowboarding, it's in Revelstoke, 10th to 17th of March, I think, and the footage is going to start going out. You'd go to the Red Bull site to be able to watch it.
RedBull TV, you get, if you've got a smart TV, you can download the RedBull TV app, or you can watch it on laptops, just on a desktop. I'm pretty sure there's an app you can get for your phone as well. So there, everything is in there, and you can see it all. And you've got countdowns for each of the days, because like Freeride World Tour events, like surf events, there's a window for that. The 10th, there's only 2 days of competition, and they'll run between the 10th and the 17th.
Gotcha. And I mentioned before, like the X Games have recently taken place. That is invitational as well. Do you see the natural selection getting to a level for athletes where they compare it with the X Games, for example?
They attract very different athletes, I think. Like what you're looking at, there was a really good quote when you're looking at the surf one, and I think this is the same a lot. If you look at the way kids now qualify for the World Cup for slopestyle, big air, and half pipe, or X Games, they're coming up with a federation who are teaching them to compete. So what we're getting are the best competitors. They have to be tactical about not just what tricks they have, when they use those tricks, where they use those tricks. And natural selection is the opposite of that. It goes back to that very pure form of self-expression. You're here because we like the way you ride in your own time. Like, ride the way you ride, and if you do that perfectly, you'll probably win. And there are some riders who are better than others, but riders ride really differently. And you see people trying to game it. There was an interesting final last year where one guy rode the whole face switch. I mean, switching powder on skis or a snowboard is so insanely difficult. But the judges said it's a gimmick. Like, yes, if you're linking two tricks together, like you do a 540, you land switch, and then you come into a switch 540. That's beautiful. But trying to ride the whole face switch just to build points, we're not letting that fly. And the guy who beat him did the biggest switch 540 you've ever seen. It was, in the end, it was a great run, but that centerpiece of a huge high-risk trick was enough to push him through. So it's more about style and creativity than it is about being a competitor.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't bring this question in so near to the end of our chat, but did I read that at the X Games they were using AI judging? Is that possible?
Possible, but I think, knowing what X Games do and the strategy they've taken over the last year or so, I don't know if you've picked up on it here, but I love X Games. It's a brilliant spectacle, but it's a TV show. They don't have to adhere to anyone else. Like, a lot of riders get in on their social followings. There's some interesting invite decisions. Like, there's a lot of riders that I would put ahead of some of the people who go in there, but they're good for TV. They work for audiences. So it's a great made for TV event. Is it a great reflection of who's best in the industry right now? Probably not. But because they're in the business, they're commercial. They're not a federation running a sanctioned competition. So they don't have to play by anyone's rules. And therefore you end up with, did they judge with AI? Who knows? But it got loads of people talking about judging with AI, as we are now.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it's just hard.
Yeah. Well, I mean that is brilliant, Ed. Really, really interesting conversation. I think if I'm interested, hopefully the listeners will be interested in it all as well. You're in
My
Austria
pleasure.
now for the World Championships. I've got one more question. Are you doing back-to-back seasons? Because you live in New Zealand when you're not in Europe, so you must have done a winter in New Zealand, then a winter over here, then a winter in New Zealand again. Is that how that's going to work?
Yeah, usually it does. I get a lot of days on snow. I'm very, very lucky.
Yeah, that's
Some
nice,
people
but of
like a
course,
summer.
as you've established earlier in New Zealand, you can go surfing and snowboarding in the same day. Cool. That is brilliant. Thanks so much for your time. and enjoy the rest of the season. And I'll put links in the show notes for the natural selection tour and a bunch of the other things that we talked about as well. Thanks a lot, Ed.
Absolute pleasure, Ian. Thank you.
So that was genuinely, I mean that.